This presidential election of 2016 could be the most critical election in America's history and has been deemed as the most bitter and fiercely contested in US politics. On Tuesday, the 8th of November, the American people will go to the polls to decide who will be their next president. It is between Democrat Hillary Clinton and a Republican challenger, Donald Trump. The American people have not been given a great choice of presidential candidates whose very characters and integrity have been put into question during this ugly political campaign. As we look back at the past 8 years of the Obama presidency, we see that it's been a disaster in both domestic and foreign policy that has seriously weakened America's moral authority and standing in the world. This is the legacy that the next president will inherit. We need to look at the policies of both presidential candidates because this could seriously affect America's destiny and ultimately that of the free world. The presidential election is a battle for the heart and the soul of the United States, with religious liberty at stake. The United States, like Britain, has been blessed with an incredible biblical heritage that dates back to the early pioneers who fled persecution in Britain and Europe to a new land where they were free to worship God. Those freedoms enjoyed by Americans for centuries are now in danger. Despite Donald Trump's moral failings, a Clinton victory would mean that the forces of liberalism would be accelerated, as Hilary would champion the causes of anti-Christian liberty, abortion, gender confusion, big government, and pursue a globalist agenda. American Christians must pray and assess which presidential candidate would best protect Christian freedoms before deciding to vote. We've endured 8 years of President Obama and his administration that has been the most liberal in America's history. And we've also witnessed the decline and the influence of the United States of America in the world. When the American people voted for Barack Obama as their 44th president back in November 2008, they wanted to show the world that the United States was not a racist nation, that American society had moved on from its awful discrimination of African Americans, marked by the courageous actions of Dr. Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement of the 1960s. Instead, he raised the expectation of African Americans and caused greater divisions as race riots have plagued his presidency. President Obama proved in office that he was no Martin Luther King and has done more to destroy America's Judeo-Christian heritage than any other US president. In terms of marriage and the family, which is the cornerstone of society, Obama has pursued the agenda of the LGBT by redefining marriage, by endorsing same-sex marriages. He also forced schools to allow boys who identify themselves as girls to be allowed access to girls' change rooms and actively promoted an LGBT lifestyle. Obama's deemed greatest foreign policy success has been the Iran deal to curtail Iran's nuclear weapons program. But this has only delayed the prospect of the world's most dangerous regime from acquiring the world's most dangerous weapon. The Iran deal gave the Islamic Republic of Iran billions in sanctions relief without curtailing their support for international terrorism and awful human rights abuses against their own people. President Obama has been the most hostile president to Israel ever since the rebirth of the nation of Israel in 1948, and his administration has constantly tried to push Israel to make painful concessions to the Palestinian Authority, despite President Abbas refusing to recognize Israel as a Jewish state. Whoever becomes the 45th president of the United States will have inherited a shocking legacy left over from 8 years of recklessness. In the US military, the Obama administration has also undermined religious freedom and expression for Christian chaplains and officers who have been censored in offering the gospel to American military personnel in need of hope and redemption. His administration has also weakened American security by making massive military cuts that has eroded the morale of US armed forces. The Obama administration has mismanaged the American finances, and the national debt amounts to $19 trillion, and that is more than any other developed country. And his government continues to spend and raise debt levels, whilst telling the American people that the economy is booming, despite the fact that 90 million Americans are not in work and 50 million are on food stamps, and the economic day of reckoning is drawing closer and closer. President Obama's approach and desire to confront the evil and danger posed by Islamist terrorist organisations like ISIS and other jihadist groups by not aggressively defeating them and not classifying them as Islamist terrorist attacks has undermined our ability in the Western world to deal with these threats. He's also been silent when Christians in the Middle East have faced genocide at the hands of ISIS, and in February 2015, when ISIS-affiliated terrorists based in Libya slit the throats of 21 young Coptic Christian men, he could not even bring himself to say that 21 Christian men had been murdered brutally by Islamists. Democratic presidential candidate Hillary Clinton is the favourite to win the race for the White House, and according to the US opinion polls, she's leading her Republican candidate. There is no doubt that she has the experience of being in high office as First Lady during her husband Bill Clinton's scandal-hit presidency in the 90s. She also served as Secretary of State from 2008 to 2012, where she's been tarnished over her failures during the siege of the US Embassy in Benghazi in Libya, in which US Ambassador John Stevens and 4 other diplomats were murdered. She's also been questioned by the FBI for allegedly downloading sensitive and classified emails to her own private email account and thus threatening American security. According to the Washington Examiner, from the documents of emails recovered from Hillary Clinton's personal emails, she attempted to erase classified information from her email server. In the last presidential TV election debate, Trump made an allegation that Clinton had abused the office of state by enriching herself $250 million. Trump said Hillary used the power of her office to make $250 million. Why not put some of that money in? You made a lot of it while you were Secretary of State. Why aren't you putting money into your own campaign? Just curious. Serious questions have to be asked about whether Hillary Clinton is fit for office, and as president of the most powerful nation in the world, would she put personal gain before the interests of the American people? This is why we have to examine and assess what a Hillary Clinton presidency would look like. It is clear that Hillary Clinton is extremely ambitious, and when she was First Lady, she had political aspirations for high office by standing by her husband despite the many scandals to hit his presidency. The most notorious was the Monica Lewinsky affair. A Hillary Clinton victory would be bad news for democracy in America, as the presidency would have been dominated by political dynasties, the Clintons and the Bushes. Only 8 years of an Obama presidency would have broken up 28 years of presidential domination by both the Bushes and the Clintons that dates back to 1988. In Hillary's bid to become the next president, she has made claims that she has been fighting for religious freedom for years. But as president, would she protect Christian freedoms? In a speech she made before she launched her 2016 presidential campaign, she made an extremely disturbing declaration that amounted to war on American Bible-believing Christians. Speaking at the 2015 Women in the World Summit, she declared that deeply seated cultural codes, religious beliefs and structures, biases have to be changed, meaning that as president she would not respect the views of millions of Bible-believing Christians in America, but to force them to change their beliefs in favour of radical social liberal agenda that would make it very difficult to stand on biblical principles. She could appoint the most liberally minded judges to the Supreme Court who would work against Christian freedoms for the next 30 years. Her presidency would see her pursue her passion in promoting her anti-Christian agenda of abortions, gender confusion, big government, and pursue a globalist agenda. What of her Republican challenger, Donald Trump, who has been plagued with moral failings during the presidential campaign and with his crude and disgusting comments about women he made 10 years ago? This past behaviour will no doubt put a lot of women off voting for him, and despite his moral failings, he's a better candidate than Hillary Clinton in protecting religious liberty and defending America. To understand why Donald Trump won the Republican presidential nominee and has been so popular with so many American voters is because he is not a politician but a businessman and represents an anti-Washington established figure. The political elites in Washington feel threatened by a Trump presidency in which he would not be tainted by their corruption, and he would be a president who would serve the interests of the American people. In terms of protecting religious freedom, his running mate, the vice presidential candidate, Indiana Governor Mike Pence, is a born-again Christian with a good track record who would have a good influence over Trump and give America the moral guidance it badly needs.
One of the greatest privileges of my journey has been the time I've spent with the evangelical community and the people of faith across our nation. There are no more decent, devoted, and selfless people than our Christian brothers and sisters here in the United States.
In conclusion, this is a critical presidential election, and in the 2012 presidential election, Obama beat the Republican presidential candidate Mitt Romney by 5 million votes, and over 17 million evangelical Christians stayed at home and did not vote, and not surprising considering that he was a Mormon. American Christians and also Christians around the world need to pray for this presidential election and go out and vote. Otherwise, a Clinton presidency will pose a direct threat to Christian freedoms. Donald Trump would not be the ideal presidential candidate for Christians to vote for, but the prospect of another Clinton presidency would be the nail in the coffin for the once great nation. Both presidential candidates would do well to remember what God says in the book of Isaiah in chapter 40. Behold, the nations are as a drop in the bucket, and as counted as small dust on the scales. Look, he lifts up the isles as a very little thing. It is he who sits above the circle of the earth, and the inhabitants are like grasshoppers, who stretch out the heavens like a curtain, and spreads them out like a tent to dwell in. He brings the princes to nothing. He makes the judges of the earth useless.